Jody with Real Progress in Action. We had done an interview last week with a Wisconsin voter, Andre, who we're actually bringing back on tonight. At this point, we have the results came in yesterday for the primary. And in the meantime, of course, Bernie suspended his campaign. Pains me to say that. So, Andre, welcome back.
Hey, how you doing?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, first of all, what are your impressions about Bernie suspending his campaign? Very disappointing. How are you feeling about it?
Well, for me, it wasn't a big surprise. I kind of seen it come in after the Super Tuesday fallout. So for me, it wasn't a big surprise since Bernie was unwilling to go after Joe Biden the way he wanted to, or not the way he wanted to, the way he should have. So I seen it coming a mile away. For me, it was just mentally prepping ever since Super Tuesday when the Democratic establishment coalesced around each other. I was like, oh, okay, well, I see the writing on the wall. And if Bernie wasn't willing to shift his campaign and do what was necessary to take Joe Biden out, then I knew what was going to happen. So I'm not extremely hurt over it. Either way, for me, the fight continues. Um, I am a little bit apoplectic about it overall in a bigger sense because we have this man who is very much losing his memory and has signs of dementia, and he's been propped up as the most electable one. And in my opinion, he's a very weak candidate. He has very weak policies, and that's a very scary thing to do. We know when we put up more moderate candidates, traditionally Democrats lose. So it's for me, it's a broader aspect that is very disheartening for me. I wasn't really surprised by the Bernie dropout, but I've seen how this might play out in November. So that's more concerning than Bernie dropping out.
Right. And of course, just yesterday, he actually had his live stream with Biden and endorsed Biden, which is expected, but a tough pill to swallow. Did you watch?
I watched some of it. I didn't watch all of it. So what I found incredibly hilarious about it is at the beginning of the live stream, Joe Biden was tripping over his own words. But that's not even the bigger point. The bigger point here is that um, the what I've seen, especially in the comments on his YouTube live stream and in his Twitter live stream, is that the Bernie Sanders coalition is not a cult. Uh, they're not just going to blindly follow Bernie Sanders just because he says they have to endorse Joe Biden. What I've been noticing is that if you want those people's vote, you have to go after it. And I think Democrats have to come to the realization that Bernie Sanders voters were not necessarily Democratic voters in the first place, but independent swing voters. And if they don't come to terms and actually ask for their votes and shift on policy drastically and make a promise to actually go along with those policies, they're not going to get those votes. And it's not because, oh, you have to fall in line and vote blue no matter who. It's simply because these people were never blue voters in the first place or Democratic voters in the first place. The only reason why they were in the voting in the primary is because of Bernie himself. And now that he's out, what incentive do they have to vote for you? And if you don't go and shift on policy, then you can't blame them for not voting. You have to blame the candidate. So, I mean, that's what I've seen took away from that live stream. And what I've noticed is Joe Biden didn't seem to adopt any of those policies. It was more of a grandstand and a show of public affection for one another more than anything policy substance.
Right. I did notice that he was kind of using the language of progressive policies and progressive values. Whereas, I mean, knowing that throughout this entire campaign and still, many of the core issues that we talk about that are so important and so central to progressive Democrats, many of those policies he's refused to adopt. And he hasn't made any effort to shift in that way. And of course, he's talking, that's talk. He's using the language of progressives and progressive values, but I don't think anyone has any faith that he's actually going to follow through with any in
Well,
any meaningful
I
way.
think maybe Democratic loyalists may think he's going to come through on some sort of substance, but for them it doesn't matter either way. They just want Trump out. So
Yeah.
that's their only goal.
Yep. So I appreciate what you say, especially when you talk about the movement continues. This is, obviously he's got the saying, "Not me, us." I
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is definitely a moment where we need to realize that it was always us. It was always us. You know what I mean? So we had this person, of course, it's definitely it's a terrible setback. But at the same time, there are lots of other things that we can do. We can keep advocating for progressive policies, and another thing that we can do is we can support people down ballot who are progressives or who are willing to support those, and we can take over the Senate, take over the House. We can focus on that. So yes, it's a setback, and it definitely puts up makes our job more challenging. But at the same time, there are still opportunities here. Of course, we're going to stop and lick our wounds. I'm still not fully, I still probably haven't fully processed it. But at the end of the day, keeping our focus on these other ways that we can do that. So I appreciate you saying that. And one of the interesting things about the Wisconsin primaries is that we did have some interesting progress. Of course, Biden won the Democratic nominate, the for the Democratic race for the president, but there were a lot of other races that Democrats did very well in. So, could you talk a little bit about that? What are these other races that were pretty significant for Democrats?
Well, so honestly, the Democratic primary or the primary in general was a mixed bag because yes, the Democrats did win the Supreme Court with Joe Karofsky, so that was a huge win overall because they were looking to solidify a majority for the Supreme Court. They gambled, and the Republicans are the ones who didn't want to extend the election, and it backfired on them. So they end up losing that seat, which was held by a Republican Supreme Court justice. So that was a gamble on the Republican side, and they lost it, which is a good thing for it to happen for Wisconsin, considering we're having the gerrymandering fight coming up pretty soon here. But where we did fail at, as far as progressivism, is Bernie did not win the Wisconsin primary. He lost actually quite handily compared to 2016. I would take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because there are a lot of reports that a lot of mail-in ballots did not get sent to people. They never got their mail-in ballots, therefore they didn't go out to vote. So we can say, hey, maybe some more votes would have came in. And also, some people just didn't go out to vote because they were afraid of contacting the virus. So it's almost like it's not a legitimate election, but somehow it's going to be legitimized. So it's 50-50 on that one. But there was also another thing that was on the ballot that maybe people who are outside of Wisconsin don't know about. But there was something called Marshall's Law on the ballot, and it had very misleading wording to it. I'm not going to go into specific of the details of it, but basically the wording was, "Hey, this gives uh, victims of crimes more rights in a lawsuit case." And the way it was framed is it makes it seem like it's just so great for the victims. But since I don't want to go into details about it because I'm not like a huge uh, specialist on this law per se, but there was multiple groups against this law, including the ACLU, uh, activist groups against it, but it won on the ballot measure because of that shifty wording. And we all know based on how you frame something is going to be based off how something gets voted on. And there was a lot of misinformation and education about this law, but let's just say it wasn't a great law to vote for. But so that's why I said that it was a mixed bag election because yeah, we got the Supreme Court, uh, but then Bernie didn't win, and people went to go vote, possibly caught the coronavirus, and then the Martial laws thing. So for me, the election was a mixed bag. But like I said, we just got to keep fighting and hope in November something happens. Right? I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know. But let's just hope that we can actually get some progressive policy on the platform. And even then, there's no sure bet that anything's going to be implemented when governing starts, if he wins at all.
Yep. So let me ask you, just out of curiosity, and you and I haven't talked about this before, so I'm not sure what kind of answer I'm going to get. But as far as you were talking about this Marshall's Law, right, and how it was framed, of course, the way that it was written on the choice on the ballot, I think we've all seen that, wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. And you said that there were organizations that were advocating against it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, where was I'm wondering, do you know who it was who was advocating for it? I know that a lot of times we see well, yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know the exact people behind it, but there was a lot of big money for it because there was a huge ad campaign behind it, and the advocates against it was pennies in comparison. So whenever there's huge ad campaigns like that and big money is backing it, it's always a little bit sketchy. And it was a dark a dark money campaign, so we don't know specifically if we dive into it who it came from, but it was a heavy ad spent in Wisconsin. You've seen people from, I think that dude from Frasier or something like that was on commercials in Wisconsin and talking about Marcy's Law. It's like, why is this guy on here? And like older voters, they love that guy. I mean, everybody loved Frasier. Um, but it was some old TV sitcom dude on there. I don't know if it was Frasier, but that's what I've heard. But it was a huge ad campaign. They had people coming in, actors coming in, doing ads, and I'm just like, this is super sketchy. So I mean, that's what got me looking into it a little bit more because whenever stuff like that happens, I question the liability of it. As I suspected, it was a very sketchy coming to terms with.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really, I mean, there it is. I had no idea. I hadn't asked you about it, but it's like, in these type of situations, that's what happens. There's always, I don't know, 99.9% of the time, there's big money behind it, and they have some interest in it. That's a shame. I'm sorry to hear that.
It's
Um,
unfortunate.
yeah. Well, so I guess all in all, kind of a mixed bag, and just kind of moving forward from here. What do you think are your next steps as far as? I mean, I know that you work with Our Revolution, so I'm sure you're going to continue organizing in that way. Have you guys talked about kind of what your next steps will be after in light of these recent um, changes?
Well, we haven't got a chance to really talk. I think we've all been taking a sort of a mental break from it for just to get ourselves together. But we've had little chats among the organizers and talked about. We don't really know exactly what direction our Wisconsin Revolution is going to take as far as the general election. We haven't gotten that deep into it, but we do know what we want to focus on. We do want to focus on Medicare for all. We want to focus on down ballot races. We want to focus on getting progressives in office, and we want to focus on recruitment right now. Right now, I feel like recruitment is going to be right because there's going to be a lot of people emboldened to step up during the general. So we're going to be focusing on phone banking, text banking, anybody who wants to help us out. And our main goal is look for progressive minded people, and also we're going to be asking people to still stay in the delegate process so that they can have some type of power when we come to the Democratic National Convention. So we want to implement those. Our main priority is implementing those progressive policies: Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, Green New Deal, uh, legalization of marijuana, things like that. Just push the platform left as possible, and that's going to be our focus from here on out.
Nice. What? Well, it was nice having you on.
Yeah,
Thank
most
you for
definitely.
coming,
Yeah, it was great.
and thank you for all you do. I think this is exactly what we need.
Oh
Continue
yeah.
with the movement, right? The struggle
Hmm.
continues.
It's always going to continue. Thanks for all you do. You've been working hard ever since I met you.
Thanks, man. All right, this is Jody from Real Progressives signing off.